This is the wee Big Banter. This is ClarkeTheKnife. My goal is to get you in and out of here with a single video with everything you need to know about this knife to determine whether it's the right knife for you, whether it's something that you want to have in your collection. I'm going to go through this in 5 sections. First, we're going to talk about some specifications, size, weight, price, things like that. Then we're going to talk about what I like, what I don't like, and some fit, finish, and value, and finally some concluding thoughts. Let's get to it. So, the wee Big Banter here, as you would expect from the name, is the big iteration of the wee Banter. Wee Banter came from Ben of Blade HQ fame, who started these Banter collaborations with wee knives probably 4 or 5 years ago by this point. The Banter came out first, did quite well. The Big Banter followed a few years after. You can see very similar design lines, but there are some key differences which we'll go into. This version here is obviously in black G10 and 20 CV, which is one of the changes from the Banter. The tiniest little text there. Most of these Banters were in S35 VN, though they made some in 20 CV. Most of the Big Banters have been in 20 CV, which is an interesting choice for a knife this size. This is a big knife. 8.34 inches overall, a 3.69 inch blade, 130 thousandths on the blade stock, which is a little bit thinner than your Spyderco Paramilitary 2. So still on the thinner side of things overall, but definitely thicker than the other Banter models. Again, 20 CV on the blade stock here. 4.36 ounces, which is a good bit heavier. And right now, these come in at $148. I think retail they were about $175, so now they're about $150. And the 2 main versions you're going to find are this version, which is all blacked out, and another version with green micarta handles and a sort of washed out 20 CV blade with a finish very similar to this sort of acid washy looking blade that they have that we use on some of their other not blacked out Banters. There's also for a while a JG10 and black version, which looked really cool. That looks to be sold out everywhere at this point. It's possible I don't know about some places that's still around. Size comparisons, about the same size as your PM2 in terms of both blade length, actually across pretty much everything. Your handle length is about the same, your choil's in about the same place, your sharpened blade length is about the same, if anything, maybe a little less. The wee Big Banter, though, is about half an ounce heavier. Not the case with these titanium scales. These are rock scale design scales, which make the PM2 a bit heavier. But stock G10, the PM2 is a 3.9 ounce knife. This is again a 4.4 ounce knife, so about half an ounce heavier. Let's compare it to your Para 3, and you'll see it is a decent bit bigger in just about every dimension. To compare it to another larger knife, here's your large Sebenza, and you'll see both in shape and size, it's quite similar to your large Sebenza. It's also more similar in weight to the large Sebenza. And again, let's bring out the Banter here. You'll see significantly longer in both blade and, really more importantly, in handle length compared to the Banter. They didn't just make this a little bit bigger, they made it a lot bigger. So with those specs out of the way, let's talk about what's good about this knife, because there are a few things that are good. The first thing, which I think I've said is a positive in every single one of my Banter reviews, is the action on this thing is awesome. And honestly, this big blade does it a lot of favors when it comes to action. The action on every Banter has been very crisp. Really nice thumb stud design. Same thumb stud as the other Banters here. And a decently strong detent that gives you a really nice, crisp detent break. And this thing just fires out. And then, because this blade is so big and heavy, this drops shut. And I'm at an angle here. You know, I'm at like 10 degrees off of vertical. If this is truly vertical, it completely drops shut. This is on bearings. And Wee knows how to make a nice drop shutty bearings action. This is a very satisfying action on both the open and the close. It's fun. It's an easy to disengage liner lock. They've given pretty solid liner lock access here, where you got access all the way through this curve right there with some nice little jimping. The lock tension is not too high, easy to disengage. You got a little bit of a double clutch there, meaning, you got to get up on the detent ball, but honestly, most of the time, you're just going to push past that and drop it down. It's very easy, very satisfying to open and close. Nice clack on the open. It's just a very solid action. That makes it very fun and satisfying. Second thing that I like, adding this choil was a very good decision. If they had kept the same design as the Banter, which is weird. I mean, now I'm looking over at the Banter and it feels like the baby Banter. It feels tiny. If they kept the same design as this Banter here, where it was just a handle that scooped up and you didn't have this choil, this blade would feel long and awkward. Like if you had to be entirely on the handle, then this blade would feel like it was extending way too far out of the front of the handle to really be useful. With this choil, you can choke pretty far up and get lots of control over this blade. So that adding that choil was a good design to make this legitimately long blade more useful. I mean, by going all the way from just under 3 inches to 3.7 inches with this one, they really did extend the blade length here. And the choil was a smart design decision to make it so you can choke up and be a lot closer to the blade edge here. And they even added a secondary sharpening choil here, so they did a bit of the Strider thing where there's a finger choil and a sharpening choil. So you still have that option as well. It was a smart design decision to keep this blade feeling useful and accessible. Now, I'm going to jump right to the challenges because unfortunately, I haven't loved this knife in use. And the first thing comes to what I sort of inferred when I was talking about that choil. This is a big and heavy knife. And if you think about it, not only is it heavier than the PM2, but it's heavier than the PM2 while being thinner on this direction. What that tells you is that there is actually a lot of weight along this axis. And unfortunately, what that means, one of the first things you notice, at least that I noticed when I picked up the Big Banter, it's an ergonomically awkward knife. These are not, I guess there's a little bit of milling, but there's very little weight reduction on these liners, all considered. I guess this side they did a decent bit. They milled out some pockets. On this side, on the liner side, there's nothing back here. And part of the reason that this ends up being 4.4 ounces, it's a very handle-heavy knife. I often don't dislike handle-heavy knives, but that butt is so long, this handle is so long. It's a comfortable 4-finger grip without using the choil. When you use the choil, you got tons of handle sticking out behind you here. And it does feel like it's pulling you back. The problem is, when I went to actually use this knife, whether it was holding it back like this, where you feel really far from the blade, or choking up like this, where you got this handle butt weighing you down, I never felt like I really had tons of control over this blade. I like that they added the choil because I have more control than I would have without the choil, but just the overall weight and how long this design is, anytime I tried to use this even for heavier duty tasks like breaking down box and stuff like that, it kind of felt like if you're holding, a heavier stick, if you got like a metal rod while you're putting together furniture or something like that. And you know how there's that awkward feeling when you got a long, thin, relatively heavy object in your hand where it kind of feels like it's always trying to rotate out of your hand? I got that same sensation with the Big Banter here. And no matter how hard I tried to push this into cuts or, drag it through things, or in the garden, dragging it through the dirt or through roots and things like that, It always felt like this knife was fighting against me a little bit. It always felt like it was kind of trying to twist in my hand. It never felt like I had a ton of control over it. I will compare that to one of my favorite large knives, the Millie, the full-size Millie, which is an even larger knife, but it doesn't have any of those problems. And this is the old school Millie. This is an ancient Spyderco design. And you can see, in this grip here, I've got the same theoretical problem in that I've got this big old butt sticking out the back, but there's less weight back here. And so even when I'm holding it like this, it feels like I still have full control over this blade. It doesn't feel like any part of the knife is trying to wobble my hand forward or back, and I can control exactly where all of this blade is all the time with the Millie. It is a large knife that doesn't feel awkward even when it's in use and even when it's being used by somebody without larger hands. That's not the case with the Banter here. It felt awkward pretty much any time I used it. And then when I started using it for lighter duty tasks, it felt really awkward. Like trying to use this to open an Amazon package and just cut through that light tape. I mean, it feels like I've got a big weight sticking out the back of my hand, and it just felt like such overkill to cut through that. Even cutting through lighter cardboard or something like that, it just wasn't a pleasant experience. It felt like I was fighting the knife the whole time. I don't know if they could have done more to lighten this handle, if they could have made the handle shorter, because the fact is, I mean, they couldn't have made the handle shorter because the blade's taking up the whole thing. I don't know if they needed to set the blade a bit further. Honestly, if you ask me, I think they probably just went a little too big with the Big Banter, and this would have been a better knife at sort of 3.4 inches. Maybe you can shrink this choil a little bit. But it always felt awkward to use. It never felt like I had a lot of control over this knife ergonomically. It doesn't help that this whole area here is so neutral that none of my fingers really have a good place for purchase other than this pointer finger and this choil, and obviously the middle finger on the other side of this little notch here. There's nothing holding any of the rest of my hand in place. It shifts around very easily, and this handle isn't very tall, so there's just nothing really keeping this knife in my hand. That's not an issue under lighter duty tasks, but the second that I try to push this through double walled cardboard or really drive it into some harder plant material, stuff like that, there's just not enough on this handle keeping my hand in place. It wants to twist, it wants to rotate, it wants to turn. It doesn't feel like a super comfortable handle under harder use, which is really what you would want a larger knife to excel at. And then the other problem that makes that problem I just talked about a little worse is the same issue I've had with every Banter model, which is that this blade grind is just not great. It's not nearly as sharp as I would like it to be. And up front here, toughness and sharpness do not need to be mutually exclusive. Again, I will bring out the military. The military has thicker blade stock, 140 thousandths versus 130 thousandths here, and its blade is not really any taller. But this thing is so much sharper behind the edge. Its cutting performance is just miles better than the Banter. Anytime I went to cut anything but the lightest duty stuff with the Banter, it was effortful to drag this thing through material. Honestly, cutting through roots and dead branches and stuff like that, that was the first time that I really used this, was on a bunch of plant material. I was testing a bunch of different knives this day. This one was the worst cutter of the entire bunch. The blade shape here is neutral. It's simple. It's a basic spear point shape. It should be pretty much fine at anything. It's not the blade shape that's the problem here. There's nothing that's a problem about this blade shape. It's not great at anything, but it's not bad at anything either. It's just that this flat grind is a little too shallow, and it ends up staying pretty fat behind the edge. Could I sharpen this to get more performance out of it? Absolutely. But out of the box, which is where most people are going to keep their banters, most people are not going to resharpen this and try to get more performance out of it for a $150 Chinese-made knife. It's aimed at the mass market. The performance, the blade performance is just not there. It just doesn't cut well enough. And as I've said in a lot of my other reviews, there's a strong link between, and Bearded Gear, back when he did reviews, used to talk about this very well. There's a close link between cutting performance and ergonomics. Because the more effort it takes to cut through something, the more any ergonomic limitations in the handle are going to show up and be more important. If you've got a super slicey blade, like TRM does this really well. TRM's ergonomics are solid, but their handles are very neutral. There's not anything that's really, ergonomically exceptional about. Actually, let me go get the Atom. It's a solid design, but it's a pretty neutral handle too. I like the curves on the Atom better than on the Big Banter, and these are about the same size, which is why I figured I would go get it. But it's not like this is an ergonomic masterpiece by itself. But when you combine the very good ergonomics here with the fact that this blade will cut for days, and so you never face a ton of resistance as you are cutting because that cutting performance is so good, this ends up feeling a million times better in the hand than something like the Big Banter, which is just a little bit worse in terms of cutting performance, or in terms of handle ergonomics. It's not that much worse if you just look at the handle. But you combine the fact that the handle is a little bit worse with the fact that the blade is way worse at cutting, and this thing ends up feeling super clunky and awkward and effortful to cut with when the Atom just glides through the exact same materials. And that's sort of how it all comes together to make this a really awkward knife to use. And that really is where I end up with the Banter, or with the Big Banter, which is an unfortunate summary of the bad, which is that this knife is cool, it's fun, but I don't like using it. There was no occasion, whether it was breaking down cardboard, doing work in the garden, doing a little bit of housework, things like that, where I ever enjoyed using this. And honestly, every single time that I use this, I used it enough to reinforce the fact that I don't like using it, and then I literally would go and get another knife, which I very rarely do, even with stuff that I'm reviewing. Especially while I'm reviewing stuff, I will generally, even if something is uncomfortable or unpleasant, keep pushing through for the sake of getting as much experience with that knife as I can. This one was such a poor performer on a lot of tasks. Again, with the combination of below average blade performance and below average ergonomics, that I would cut tasks short just so I could go get another better knife to do the same thing. I wanted to like this knife. I love the idea of the Big Banter. I don't love what this one actually is in practice. Fit and finish and value, all of that is fine. There's no issues here. This is a $150 Wii knife. One of the best things that Ben has done in the Banter partnership is he has delivered Wii knives quality below typical Wii prices. Wii knives tend to run in the $200 to $250 range, and in that $200 to $250 range, they are, I think, the best in the market. I like Wii knives over Best Tech, and frankly, Riot these days very rarely enters that $200 to $250 price point. The only time I think they do is maybe some of their work with Giant Mouse, which ends up being a very good value for that reason. This stuff here, the fit and finish that you are getting, the blade finish is great. Again, do I wish the grind was more aggressive? Yes, but the finish here, they got a nice swedge up here for some extra visual interest, which is an addition over the original Banter. The original one didn't have that swedge. That's a cool touch. The black wash they put on here is really cool looking. It's not a flat DLC. It's got a stone wash on there after the fact. This might even be DLC over an acid wash, the way it looks. The jimping is squared off, and the whatever wash they put on there rounds it off a little bit. It's more ornamental than functional, but it's fine. The finishing on the handles is really nice. It's a nice light peel ply texture, really solid chamfers throughout the whole thing. Again, a decent amount of internal milling. I don't actually know exactly why this knife ended up so heavy. Because the other thing is, I mean, you're talking 4.36 ounces for a 3.69 inch blade. That's significantly over an ounce an inch for a knife that is not that tall. This knife should not be that heavy. I don't quite know why that is. Maybe it's because this is all steel, not titanium. I don't know. But there's nothing I can criticize on the fit and finish. It's all done well. It's a simple knife design, but on the fit and finish perspective, you're not going to find anything to criticize here. And if you do like this design and you want a Big Banter, and the idea of that appeals to you, then this is solid. You're not going to find any issues with this, especially at the $150 it's fetching right now. At the $175 it was originally listed at, starts to get a little more, okay, maybe we would want slightly better finish liners, things like that, but even then, it's fine. But the summary conclusion really comes back to where I ended up with the bad. And here I'll bring out the Atom kit. So, the problem is there is no occasion in which I enjoyed using the Big Banter. The action is super fun. This big old blade, it cracks on the open, it swings shut on the close. That detent is great, the thumb studs are great, it's fun. And honestly, having a knife this big that has the neutral banter look and keeps to that design philosophy is cool, it's fun, it's a great idea. I love that they tried to do this. But I don't necessarily think the neutral design philosophy of the Banter translated all that great to this larger size. And I also think the execution of this blade did leave it hanging, and as a result, as cool as it is, I did not like using this knife at all. And that would be, if this was, say this was the only knife this size at this level of quality, around $150 to $175, then I would be like, okay, you know what, maybe my final review is, okay, it's a decent knife, but you just really got to resharpen it aggressively to try to get some more blade performance out of here. If you got more blade performance, then the ergonomic issues would become less of an issue because it would be slicier. But the problem is it's not. And I'll bring back actually the two ones that I just talked about in this review. These two knives I've got on the table, and this is literally stuff that I have in my collection right now. I'm not even stretching to look at the market. The TRM Atom, made in the US, almost the exact same size, still has neutral ergonomics, obviously has that washer action rather than a bearings action, so it's a little slower, a little smoother, but some people, I prefer that. It's certainly not worse, it's just different. This is a made in the USA knife that with these G10 scales is around $200, $25 to $50 more than we. And frankly, if you took this same knife and you were to make it overseas, it would absolutely be price competitive. Part of that premium is that they are making it in the USA, which is important to me and I think to most of my audience. And then you've got the Spyderco Millie here, also made in the USA and right at the same price point as this Big Banter. Certainly right near the price point when it was $175. Now it's a little bit more. I mean, this Millie, if you get in standard materials, it's right around that $200 as well. And now the newer Millies are getting with the Spyderco compression lock, which is even safer, has an even better action, has a washer action that feels like bearings. There is absolutely no reason that I would recommend the Big Banter over either of these other knives on the table if you're looking for, unless really that $150 is your absolute limit. You're going to get so much more performance out of either of these other knives for only a little bit more money than the Big Banter. And so you end up in a space where the competition is super stiff and the performance that you're getting just isn't there. I mean, frankly, if the Millie's too big, get a PM2. PM2 is $185. Again, probably $30, $40 more than the Big Banter, and you're going to get so much more performance out of your PM2 than you would out of the Big Banter. So if you really like this design, actually, even if you really like this design, it's hard for me to recommend this knife. The performance just is not there. Ergonomically, blade performance wise, I did not enjoy using this knife. I wanted to like it. I like the idea. I like what they attempted. I like the way this design looks. And I really, I like the banter. The banter has some limitations, but I like the banter. I like what they're trying to do. I wanted to like this knife. I really didn't like this knife. And so I can't really think of anybody I would recommend it for unless you really love this design, you really like thumb stud bearing actions, and even then, you got to be okay resharpening this thing yourself and laying that edge back, because otherwise, this is going to be a fidget toy and it's not going to be something you're ever going to enjoy using. So, if you fit that very, very narrow demographic, then go ahead. You're going to enjoy the Big Banter. Everybody else, there are significantly better options on the market. And frankly, the simple response is if you want an EDC knife that is well made, neutrally designed, that will do pretty much anything you throw it at, and you've got around $150 to spend, save up a little bit more and just get a TRM Atom, and you are going to be so much happier with your purchase. That's where I end up with the wee Big Banter. Wish it was more positive than that, but that is my honest review. Hope you found this useful. Hope it was a good use of your time. Please give me any thoughts, comments, anything like that down in the comments below. Also, let me know if there are any other knives you would like me to look at. Right now, at the moment, I am purchasing all these knives myself, selling them on the secondary market, trying to recoup my costs as much as possible. Nothing is sponsored. If anything is sponsored in the future, it's going to have a Nick Shabazz style disclaimer up front. So if you do suggest a knife, I'll try my best to get my hands on it. It's going to be budget and availability limited. You're dependent on those things. But still, give me your feedback, give me your thoughts. Let me know how I can make these more helpful. And I hope I see you again soon. Have a good one. This was Clark the Knife.